still on the strawberry peach game. All right, we're back. So I have a couple more books that I want to talk about within the hyped books on the internet that we've been discussing recently. This is probably one of the last videos I'll do in this vein for quite a while, but I couldn't close it out until I talked about these last couple of books that I personally think are appropriately hyped on the internet right now. So let's waste no time and get right into it. The first book that I'm going to talk about is a pretty divided one. I think I've mostly seen good things about it, but there are some people out here that think this is overhyped. I am somebody that thinks that it is currently pretty appropriately hyped, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I've talked about this book quite a few times on this channel, so I won't waste a lot of time discussing it further, but basically this follows our main character, Addie LaRue, who is growing up in France in the early 1700s, and she feels like her whole life people have been dictating what she can do, where she can go, who she can be with, and she's kind of fed up with it. So she runs away to the river one day and she meets this divine being. He's kind of supposed to be a god, I guess, kind of the god of death. And she makes a deal with him. She barters with him for her freedom. And of course, if you are not very, very specific with your wording, what you end up getting is not always what you wanted. Freedom is interpreted as her becoming invisible to everybody that she comes across. As soon as she meets somebody, if they look away, if they lose sight of Addie for even a second, they completely forget who she is, which means she can't get a job, she can't get a place to live, she can't maintain any meaningful relationships. After she makes this deal with this god, she goes back home and her parents have no idea who she is. They cast her out. She is completely alone in the world. And the worst part about it is now she's immortal. So she has to live like this forever until she decides to give her life to this god and he will take her away to die peacefully. But she's a very stubborn main character and wants to go as long as possible without that happening. So the bulk of our story actually takes place in present day New York City. Addie has definitely become sharper and grittier and a lot less naive, and she has figured out how to survive with this curse that's been placed upon her life, and that looks like swindling people, pickpocketing people, doing whatever she can to provide for herself without really thinking about any of the consequences that it has on other people. Until one day she meets somebody that actually remembers her, and that kind of kickstarts our story of Addie for the first time in literally hundreds of years having somebody that knows who she is and remembers who she is. I am a personal big fan of V.E. Schwab. One of the book series that I just talked about in my video where I talk about underhyped books is A Darker Shade of Magic, which is the first V.E. Schwab book that I ever read, and I fell in love with that series, that book, that entire world, and the writing style I think is phenomenal. And that definitely carries over to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I think that the writing is really great. I think that the characters are developed so well. I feel so connected to Addie throughout this story. I want to see her happy. I want to see her get her happy ending. I want to see her find success in everything that she does. And I just want somebody to remember her like this one character inevitably does later on. It is very intense and high stakes. It's emotional. It's adventurous. It feels action-packed at some time. We're spending a lot of time in the past as well, learning about everything that Addie went through over the last couple hundred years before we're in the present tense. And there's a lot that goes on. How her relationship develops with this god that she made a deal with, what that looks like. It's crazy. But the main thing that this book does so well is the ending. This is the book that I've said a couple times. I finished it and I was so hyped up on adrenaline. I needed to discuss it with somebody immediately. So I ran to my husband and I made him sit through basically a 2-hour retelling of this entire book until he got the story enough to be able to converse with me about it. I feel a lot of love and excitement over this book, and I think everybody should read it. I understand it's not for everybody. If you don't like urban fantasy in particular, if you're not a fan of the morally gray main characters or villains or ambiguous happy endings, I don't know exactly how to say it without giving too much away, but it's just really well done. And I personally do think that this book is appropriately hyped on the internet right now. The next book is definitely one of my favorite books that I've read this entire year, and that is Happy Place by Emily Henry. I was very reluctant to read this book initially, and the only reason why I ended up reading it is more for curiosity, because I decided I wanted to read every Emily Henry book and then rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite. And I had extremely low expectations on this one, even though I had seen so many people raving about this book, raving about the story, story and the main characters and the plot, everything surrounding this book. And yet I was very uninterested in reading it because it is a second chance romance. And I just don't like those books typically. It's not usually the trope that I gravitate towards. And I just kind of thought I wouldn't like it that much. I am somebody that really enjoys the beginning of a relationship and watching somebody fall in love. This is we're joining in on the end of a relationship and maybe how they come back together in it. So our main characters are Harriet and Wynne. They have been together for a long time. They're in this group of friends that's very inseparable. They're all so close. Harriet and Wynne have been engaged for a while, but they go through some pretty traumatic life circumstances that keep delaying the wedding. At one point, they just reach a breaking point and they break the engagement off. But the problem is they break the engagement off while there is a lot going on with them and with their friends, and they don't tell anybody about it. This group of friends goes on vacation together every single year to this lake house, and the plan was for Harriet to break the news to their friends there. But when she arrives, she sees that Wynne is also there, and it's this big last hurrah because the lake house that they always vacation at is being sold, unfortunately. And so this is the last time that this group of friends is going to be vacationing in this spot together, and there's a lot of sentimentality, there's a lot of emotional connection with this property, and so it's kind of sad for everybody. All of the friends decide to make this the best vacation yet, to go out with a bang. And so Harriet and Wynne are like, geez, we can't tell everybody that we broke up now. That would be so incredibly awkward and ruin this vacation for everybody, which means that they have to pretend that they're still together. And while they're still together, they kind of inevitably end up figuring things out and talking about what went wrong in their relationship, what the deal is with this conflict, this miscommunication. It's not even that crazy of a plot line when you lay it out that way, but what I was so surprised about is the depth Emily Henry was able to infuse into these characters and into their stories. It's a very emotional book, and these characters go through really, really tough things. I think that she paints it so well, you really can't point the finger and say, oh, Harriet is at fault here, or Wynne is at fault here, because I think a lot of these second chance romance books are written where the guy does something stupid and then has to beg for the girl's forgiveness so that they can get back together. That is not really what this is at all. It's two broken, flawed people that are trying to figure it out, and they love each other, but they reached a breaking point in their relationship where they weren't able to continue on, and now they're kind of back in that spot of, well, can we make this work? And if we were going to make this work, what needs to change? What do we need to talk about? What do we need to understand about each other? And I think that it is so beautifully written. When I talk about a character book and me liking a book for its characters, this is probably the best example that I can think of. The plot itself, there's not like a ton to write home about. It's fine. It's the way that she writes these characters, Harriet and Wynne, but also the friend group. You spend a lot of time with the friend group as well, and they're just so great, so well written. It feels like a family. I can't say enough good things about it. I was so incredibly surprised. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I loved it so much, is because actually I went in with super low expectations. Even though I had only heard good things about it, I was expecting not to like it. So the fact that not only did I like it, I loved it, and it's one of my favorite books of the year, it's just very exciting to me. I think it's really well done. Again, it is second chance romance, and there may be people like me out there that don't like that trope and still didn't necessarily like this book because of it, and that's totally okay. But I think this is less of a romance book and more of a character study on relationships and friendships and romances and how broken we are as people and how to love each other through that. I think it's just really well done. So that's Happy Place. Okay, the next book that I think is definitely appropriately hyped on the internet right now is a very recent read for me. It is my most recent 5-star read, so you've probably already heard me talk about it, but I gotta say it again, it's The Ministry of Time. I absolutely adored this book. I had heard such great things about it. I had heard so many people raving about it. I thought the premise was really interesting. Again, my expectations were a little bit different with this one going into it. It's described, even on the dust cover, that it's kind of a rom-com, funny, humorous romance, which doesn't feel accurate to me at all. This book was really, really deep. It was really exciting. We get into action-packed, save the world government espionage at the end that I was totally not expecting, but also the way that the relationships are written in this book is so incredibly beautiful. So we follow our main character who doesn't actually have a name. It's never revealed what her name is, but it's not something that really hinders your reading because it's first-person perspective, so we don't really really hear her name that much anyway. She works for the British government, a sect of the government that's called the Ministry. And the Ministry has basically figured out time travel. They bring people back from the past into the present called expats. They take them from their own timeline and they choose very specific people that are not really strong in affecting history and also that are about to die in their own timeline to protect themselves if they happen to die in the present tense. Who cares? They were going to die anyway. And also, they didn't have much effect on history regardless, so they're kind of the perfect people to bring back. They pair up these expats with what they call bridges, which is what our main character is, a present tense person that is assigned to an expat to kind of help them acclimate to 21st century. Our main character is a bridge assigned to Graham Gore, who is from the 1800s. He was a British military guy that was assigned an expedition in Antarctica and died from hypothermia up there. I will say that the romance is very sweet. It is very humorous, and it's kind of got some of those Kate and Leopold vibes if you've ever watched that movie, where he comes from out of history and doesn't know how to use modern technology. He doesn't know modern language as much. He has very specific ideals about women and working and the government, and it's very outdated. But the way that he speaks about them and acts on them is just kind of really sweet and adorable, and their relationship is really great and wonderful to read about. But I don't truly believe that that is the crux of the story. Our main character is also half Cambodian, but she kind of presents as being fully Caucasian, so not a lot of people know that her mom is full Cambodian. So it deals with a lot of interesting generational trauma tied to being an immigrant and a first generation immigrant in her family, and her parents and how they dealt with racism while she was growing up, what that was like for her. She took a lot of her mother's trauma onto her own self, and it definitely affects her as an adult. And a lot of the book is dealing with forgiveness and mercy and hope in a way that's so subtle, and you don't really realize that you're reading about those topics until you finish the book. And along the way, there's just a couple gut punches from the author of sentences or paragraphs or lines that I personally connected to really deeply. This book made me cry in the end. I was laughing out loud. I was crying. I was nervous and scared for these characters in some of the action-packed moments, and I just wanted to see them happy and succeed. And I think it's just a really well done book. This is also a debut novel, which is extremely impressive to me overall. So this was such an easy 5-star for me, and it was very recent. I know some people don't connect with a lot of the themes in this book as much as maybe others do, but I still think that it is totally worth the read and a great book. All right, next up we have an extremely popular book that honestly I haven't really heard much negativity around at all, and that is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I've read 2 of this guy's books, The Silent Patient and The Fury, most recently. He has a 3rd book called The Maidens, which I still have not read yet, but I think I would really like to read it. But The Silent Patient is definitely one of the most popular psychological thriller mystery books that I can think of, at least in modern day writing. I've always seen this around, but I never picked it up to read until it was a pick in a book club that I'm in earlier this year, and that kind of finally forced me to read it, and I'm so happy that I read this book. I am not much of a mystery thriller reader in general. I think I would like to be, but I've struggled with finding books that I like in that genre. This one I absolutely loved, and now unfortunately I compare every book that I read to it, and most of them have been falling flat, but that's something for another time. So The Silent Patient follows our main character Theo, who is a psychotherapist at a mental institution where there is this woman there named Felicia who killed her husband and hasn't spoken since. Theo kind of becomes a little obsessed with her and wants to cure her. He wants to help her. He wants her to speak again. He wants to know the mystery behind why she killed her husband. And so us as the reader, we're kind of slowly putting pieces together, figuring it out as Theo is figuring things out and as Felicia is growing and changing and kind of starting to maybe come back to the real world. It all takes place in a mental hospital. It's in winter. It's kind of dark and spooky. The whole time there's just like an unsettling nature about this book and about the way that it was written in a way that it really added to the whole ambiance of the book. I personally enjoyed it. I know it's not for everybody. It may be over the threshold for for some people of like creepy disturbingness. For me, it was perfect and I enjoyed it immensely. The twist in this book is one of the best twists that I have ever read. I definitely didn't see it coming. I'm also not necessarily somebody that tries to figure out a mystery in a book. I'm just kind of there along for the ride and waiting for the big reveal. This one though was not what I was expecting, and that is one of the best feelings as a reader, to get so duped and shocked by a twist. It felt really satisfying. It felt really earned, just the tension that was built throughout the entire thing. I would probably agree with the general sentiment that this is definitely one of the best modern psychological thrillers, mysteries, whatever genre you want to put it in. This is top tier for me, and I definitely think that it deserves all of the hype and all the accolades that it's getting right now and that it's gotten when it was even first published. All right, and lastly, this is an interesting one because I've seen a lot of positive things about this on the internet, and I tend to agree with everybody in what they're saying. However, funny enough, on some of my other overhyped videos, people have commented that they really don't like this book, which is the first negative thing that I heard about this book with some people's comments. So we're gonna talk about it. It's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. The first Andy Weir book that I read was The Martian, obviously, and I personally think that The Martian is better than Project Hail Mary. I actually think The Martian is kind of underhyped, especially with all the praise and recognition that Project Hail Mary has gotten. Not that it's undeserved, but I think The Martian needs to get a little bit more. We won't talk about that right now, maybe later, but Project Hail Mary I think is wonderful and definitely deserves a lot of the hype that it gets. So we follow our main character, Ryland Grace, who has to save the world. There is a foreign alien substance that suddenly is attracted to the Earth's sun and is stealing the energy from the sun, which means that the Earth is dying and has a very specific amount of time before it will freeze over and kill everybody. All of the governments of the world put their heads together. Money is no object. We have to save the world. What do we do? Ryland Grace goes up into space through a series of many events. I am deeply paraphrasing right now. Ryland Grace goes up to space and he is on a mission to try to figure out a way to stop this alien entity from eating the Earth's sun. That's a crazy plot premise. It's very intense. It's a wild story that you're taken on, but what's so interesting about this book is it's funny. It's humorous. It's kind of lighthearted even. It's dealing with this really, really intense thing, and if you think about it long enough, the sun is dying and every single person on Earth is going to die. It's really dark, but the way that it's written is so funny. I was laughing out loud through most of this book. I think that the characters are really well written. There are multiple characters because you're dealing with a lot of people on Earth. You're also dealing with Ryland in space and some stuff that happens there. I just think it was a very fun juxtaposition between this intense, dark plot, but the way that you're reading it, it's a comedy essentially. I think it was done really well. Andy Weir has a very, very specific writing style, and if you don't like that writing style, I could totally see how this book would not be for you. I personally love it. I've always loved it from even The Martian days. I think that The Martian is a little bit easier to understand and grasp personally, and I'm glad that I have experience with that book and that I read it before this one. The science in this one is a lot, and it is a long book, and some of the things went quite a bit over my head, but even still, I never felt like I was missing key plot points that would cause me to be confused later on. I think you can glean out of this book exactly what you want to glean out of it. If you want to read it slowly and Google the whole time while you're reading it and figure out all the science stuff that's happening, that's great. If you kind of want to skim the very technical, very scientific parts of the book as well, I think you can still find just as much enjoyment in it. The ending is beautiful. The pacing of it is really well done. I think there's appropriate action parts and climactic parts, but also some deeper, slower sections that Andy Weir is able to really take his time with. I personally really, really liked it. I would love to know if you are one of those people that don't enjoy this book, why. It might be the writing style just because of how different it is from any other author that I personally have read, but overall I enjoyed it so much, and I definitely see a lot of people out there that are enjoying it to the same extent that I am. Oh, there you have it. I think that these 5 books are appropriately hyped on the internet right now. I all think that they are deserving of the praise and the excitement that they're getting, and I wasn't disappointed with any of them. I read some of them based on the hype, some of them I just was able to stumble across organically on my own, but I wasn't disappointed. If anything, it exceeded expectations many times, and so I think that if you have not given these books a chance yet, especially if you're avoiding them because of maybe some of the hype you've seen around it, I would give them a shot, make the opinion for yourself, but personally I think that you will find a couple gems in there. Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas of books that definitely are deserving of the hype that they get. If you have any underhyped or overhyped books, I love seeing everybody's comments and answers. It's so interesting and intriguing, and I've loved having the conversations with you guys. So as always, thank you so much for joining and hanging out with me, and we'll see you next time.